oh, we're going.
That
We
doesn't
remembered
happen.
to hit record this
Yeah, I
time.
figure I just might as well start because like half the time I say, "Hey, repeat that," and then but it's the same thing. You're talking about everything seems religious. I was saying everything seems MLM.
Yeah.
Oh, I know.
You just hear these stories over and over again. I remember, like, I don't know, it's been in the last couple of years where my dad kind of had a revelation where, because, like, just talking about his marriage and also talking about his career and who he worked for, which is education, we'll just say that. And then, and at one point I'm like, Dad, you realize I keep telling you the same thing, and it's because in the same case, it's the same problem. You're being abused. You're 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 trying to be rational with abusive people, whether it's your wife or your employer. Like, the reason that they're making you feel crazy is that they are making you feel crazy because they're not they're not trying to do what you are about. Like,
So
my dad kind of had, like, he still hasn't quite, I haven't quite gotten him to totally grok it. But, like, I kept trying to tell him, like, Dad, the reason you struggled so much in education is that you care about education. and and
it
the
always
people
causes
who run education do not care, like, because, like, academic, like, I guess if you break the etymology of the word academic down, it means, like, for the sake of knowing. Like, literally, when it's like,
really.
well, and that's just academic, which is just to say, well, and that's just for the sake of knowing, which is to say, yeah, you just like knowing so much, that's how we care about it. And the fact is that, like, and I learned this when I was in public school, where I had the realization is that, and then, like, and which is not to say there aren't a lot of great teachers scattered about and a lot of great academics, but the people who run public education are not academics in that they don't love learning for the sake of learning. None of those people are there because they really care about teaching or learning or any of that stuff. They're careerists that landed there for the most part, I think. Or they were shitty
Well,
or there were people who really wanted to be good teachers and they were too crappy, so they got promoted upward. In the famous, that's everybody's vice principal was just a really terrible teacher that failed upward.
well, there's also a kind of a problem that some of them that do get gung ho about wanting to teach stuff, they're more gung ho about certain social issues than about teaching
Well,
kids math.
uh, well, yeah, because looking back, because, like, I graduated high school in what, 98, 98, 98, I think that's right. And even then, like, I realized so much of, like, the Herbert Marcuse uh, and the Paulo Freire pedagogy, the press type stuff, that I was actually, you know, yeah, I mean, elementary school and environmentalism. That was the thing that first stood out to me, where I'm like, this feels a lot like church, even as a little kid, as like a 10-year-old, you
Everything's
know?
church. That's what I was gonna say because I was listening to these academic types, these I guess longtime 25-year Hegelian academics breaking down what they consider to be some right-wing takes on Hegel, and they've discovered what they call a new trope, which is the right-wing atheist type who calls everything a religion. That's a new trope to them now, and that's just because we figured out that their Hegelianism is a religion, because it is,
Yeah. Well, I keep finding this over and over again, is that, like, especially with all the, like, with the whole connection to Marxism. I mean, you and I keep sending this stuff back and forth. We're like, because, like, you listen to James Lindsay, and he's just like, yeah, this stuff it's not even veiled Marxism, it's just Marxism. And people are, and then you go, like, the left-wing media is like, oh, look at this crazy trope going around about how everything's Marxism. And then you go look, and it's like, it's always on the first page, like within a couple paragraphs, where, like, the connection to Marxism is right there. And it's like, oh, yeah. And
yeah.
then when you confront them about it with the paper in front of you, they're like, well, yeah, but what's wrong with that? Like, that's becoming a trope, but, oh, well, yeah, well, what's wrong with that? Like, they saw that in the James Lindsay, that debate that happened just, I don't know, a few weeks
Yeah,
ago, the critical race theory debate. And then, I mean, it happened
but that's
in real
almost
life, in real time, with my brother a few months ago.
to the point that we're trying to get to, is just to them accepting and admitting the part
Yeah.
that's Marxism, and then we can get to the part about what's wrong with it. We haven't even gotten to that discussion yet, but you tell me why you're dodging the title or the name or the ability, because you
Yeah.
kind of maybe inherently know that at least other people know right off the bat that there's something wrong
Yeah.
with that.
No, it's one of the ways that I have way more respect for Mormons than woke atheists is that the Mormons cop to it being a faith. You
Yeah.
know, like they're
That's what I say. Like
they're not playing hide the ball with that part of it.
there was a
You know,
debate with like I even think it's like a stronger epistemology. I think it's better epistemology. There was a part in that debate with Radio Free Mormon and the Midnight Mormons, and they said, "Well, hey, there's this magic worldview." And I remember for me going through my atheism movement with like that Michael Quinn and all that stuff, just starting to call stuff magic was part of the magic worldview. Oh my gosh. But there was like a moment in that debate where they said, hey, you believe in magic, and there was these people who believed this in magic before Joseph Smith, and Quaco just says, yes, I believe in magic. And like to me, there's just something that's even like a stronger epistemology about that than
yeah, absolutely. Like the Mormons at least admit that the articles of faith are just that.
yeah.
You know, they come out and say these are articles of faith. These are things that we believe, and we don't necessarily feel like we have to prove them. You
Yeah,
know,
exactly.
whereas almost all of the assumptions of modern leftist politics are just articles of faith. You know,
They
like
are, man.
systemic racism, article of faith.
I was just barely reading some new historicism stuff that comes from the Marxist historicism, which is all back to the dialectic and reading dialectic crap, and even reading other people trying to bring the dialectic, like everybody took the Marxist dialectic and said, I'm going to put it over here, put it over here, and put it over here, and this is a great methodology. And you go, what's the methodology? What's the methodology? And you look and you look and you read and you read and you look and you look, and the methodology is magic. That's what it is. It's we just find the negations and disagree with each other, and then alchemy, boom, the great thing happens.
Well, that's one of those things where it's like, because I think to myself, like trying to simplify the Marxist worldview, and as far as I can tell, it's totally fair to say that it basically comes down to the belief that, like, if civilization would just get out of the way, we would have paradise.
Yeah.
And civilization is interested in its own perpetuation, and so it's going to keep trying to keep going. And so the only way to have paradise is to stop civilization. And that sounds so, like, it's like what's like when Richard Dawkins, when he says, like, well, Catholicism is, if like you eat the zombie cracker, it's that thing where it's like, no, like, you don't like that characterization, but it fits, like, it's reality.
So I was watching these Hegelian professors critique James Lindsay's take on Hegel, and of course they were sneeringly sneery at it all, and they got to these points of saying, why does Jordan Peterson or James Lindsay call it neo-Marxism? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, why do you put the word neo? It's because you want it to sound like neo-Nazi? Just call it Marxism. Like, okay, that's what we've been trying to do. I mean, that's the reason that they tried to call it neo-Marxism, is because you guys were refusing to accept that it was a type of Marxism. But if you learn and actually read enough about Marxism, it's not very hard to see when people are actually doing it. It's a pretty easy concept to see. You just get this, you stratify stuff into two different categories. Typical Marxism's class, but now we can just make it oppressor oppressed, and then you do the dialectic, which is constantly negate stuff, like constantly have the things fight each other, which is the conflict theory. Create the conflict, and the conflict will bring about what they think is, like, they initially go back to the Greek, and in the Greek they say it was like the conflict of water and air becoming poofing into a mist type of thing, and that mist will be the future super duper utopia. And that's all it is. And of course, you've had 200 years of different philosophers who somehow got taken up with that, like that's some sort of magic, and written and emphasized different parts, and brought different things to be more important than other things, and that's the endless circle that they're all in. And
and you can see that, like, 'cause every tool of Marxist thought, like, it's a philosophical tool, as it were, they're all about breaking things.
Yeah.
And this is that deconstruction thing that we were talking about, has become this a magic word for the.
You want to watch it? Let's watch.
Have you got the clip?
I've got the clip. Yeah.
Because and then like negative thought, like and I mean that's one of those things where like when somebody says like, well, Marx's thought is all about deconstructing, it's all about breaking stuff, it's all about negation. There's no building there, there's no plan, there's no strategy, there's
So
no,
so
yeah,
people will talk about the Hegelian dialectic, which isn't really the dialectic, because that dialectic actually came from Fichte, and Hegel used different words to talk about dialectic, and then Marx changed the dialectic into this other dialectic, and then all these years later, the postmodernists who do the deconstruction, they weren't really doing the dialectic. What Derrida was doing was this thing called difference, which if you look at it, it's the melding together of two different words, differ and defer, and it's going to be different, but it's going to continue, which is Aufheben. You know what I mean? So the deconstruction itself is just kind of a version of Hegelian stuff, and you can even read in Derrida's stuff that he's doing a Hegelian thing with words, and if you try to parse this out with any sort of philosopher, very very smart person, big brain person, already right now they would try to be saying, oh, you guys just don't get it, you don't understand it, you don't follow it, because the truth of it is that if you agree with it, you get it. If you don't agree with it, you don't get it. Or not even that I disagree with it, I just don't think it's the magic thing. I mean, I think there might be some value in like clashing ideas for sure. And so
no, it's the whole thing like we always talk about, where like they talk about put on this lens. We're gonna analyze whatever Bugs Bunny through a feminist lens. Fun.
yeah,
That's a good intellectual academic practice. But you don't get on the freeway and keep driving around with your feminist problem glasses, because the world instantly becomes farcical, as we keep seeing over and over again.
When I try to land on what I think the world would be best at, would be is if you did try to understand all the different things, and you were a person kind of capable of using a lens or taking off a lens, at will. And if we made more, I think that was what the original idea of the universities were, is make more people in society, people who are able to put on a lot of different lenses for different situations, But going back to some of that stuff, that's kind of the constant argument of something's a dialectic or not. One of the things that they do is somebody like Marx takes the Hegelian dialectic, which the Hegelian dialectic is more, he never said dialectic. Derrida never said he liked the word deconstruction. It's endless throw sand and ice stuff, which is part of the dialectic. But the thing Marx did is he turned it concrete. He made it so now we're going to put people against the people instead of like an idea versus an idea, and when you did that, there's this thing that I noticed that so like Derrida came up with deconstruction, and his deconstruction, as I get pedantic about, was about words. It was really had to do with like a post-structuralism. Derrida says I'm not a post-structuralist, but it was post-structuralism. And Judith Butler later did kind of a Marxist thing, which is she made it concrete. Instead of talking about words and ideas, I'm going to make it just about people. People are shifty, and you can't understand what they are at any sort of time. And the funny thing about that is, like, when Marx goes and does his new way of doing Hegel, or Butler does her new way of doing Derrida, those are the people making the category error, or even purposely doing it. They're the ones who are shifting it and making it wrong. But if you notice it and you point it out, you're the idiot. You're the one making the error. You're the one making the error for noticing their error. That's how the critics of you will freak out about how you're describing it. You go describe the error that Crenshaw makes when she starts doing deconstruction, or I describe the error that these people make when they start talking about deconstruction and post-Mormonism. I'm the idiot, because they're the ones making the category error that I'm talking about if I'm being reviewed by some very smart person, professor. Did I lose you?
No, I'm waiting for Unite the Thrive.
Basically an activity every month. Some of them are deconstructing activities. Some of them are...
What is a deconstructing activity?
Well,
activity is such a Mormon-loaded word.
Well, they're
We're
turning
all going to get together for activities. That's a very Mormon thing to do.
I think the post-Mormon, the John DeLynn community, is turning the word deconstruction into a Mormon word.
Well, they should deconstruct themselves a new word than activity.
That would be the right way to do it. Constantly negate the negation, like a
Because
Derrida.
like I mean, young men's what do you do? Oh, hey, you want to go out? No, I got a young men's activity. That's what you right.
So this is the problem: is if we were doing real deconstruction, what does it mean? We can't land on that, because real deconstruction is we can't figure out what the word means. So it slips. It means something different right now than it did 2 minutes ago, anyway.
Formatted like a party. Some of them are like, we have someone in our group who's been in AA, and she's helping us formulate these great like little deconstructing meetings. We also have family park days. Like, we're doing so much. And so we have these incredible speakers coming in for the January 22nd event. And really, this is going to be an opportunity to just have a great, nourishing day. And also just meet.
Yeah,
that's a very
everything's Mormon and everything's an MLM again.
Yeah.
Although these guys have said they're not an MLM, so that meta awareness made them not one. Although I agree, it's not technically an MLM, but this is like,
John DeLynn won't talk about Thrive without saying that it loses money.
It's church.
The people that some of them deconstructed years ago, and they're just now starting to connect with other.
So the deconstruction years ago was a moment. It's like, so I'm trying to do a Derridian deconstruction of these words that they're using, because they're not using deconstruction how Derrida would use it, and it's now a ritual, I guess, of some sort. Religious ritual.
It's ex-Mormonism plus.
Yeah.
It really is just that, because I keep thinking, like, everybody says, oh, that like ex-Mormons, oh, we need to connect. Where, like, I don't know, there's that initial part where it's really helpful to be able to talk to somebody openly about whatever your faith crisis, history, all that stuff, who actually knows, because you and I have both had the experience of like dating people who've never encountered Mormonism, and
they just think we're weird for talking about it.
They struggle to and they struggle to understand, and because you try to explain your childhood, and you're like, well, pioneers, and like they have no perspective about anything. All this crap.
I went on a 2-year mission. Well, what was that? Was it fun? Did you drink a lot of beer?
But so it's important to have a community. But like after that, like, what else should it possibly mean to be ex-Mormon than to say like, well, I was a Mormon, I ain't no more. After that, what should that say about anything about you? Like, it's one of the things that, I mean, it annoys me how people talk about atheists. Like, that's one of my biggest criticisms about those Midnight Mormons, is the way they use the word atheist is extremely loose and erroneous. And like, for example, I always have to say, like, atheism has one opinion about one question and nothing else follows.
Yeah, except I think these people here make that same category error. They turn it into a thing. Everybody's
exactly.
Change of,
and like I always say, there's no such thing as atheist politics. There's no atheist haircut. There's no atheist anything. Atheism
it's supposed to be
one
the true
opinion
null
about one question.
It's a null hypothesis.
And like after that, literally adding anything to that is just a plus, and it makes the atheism part superfluous and silly, because you can just have the other part, I mean, belaboring the point, it betrays that this is more than
well, this whole entire infomercial, I mean, it wasn't.
How long is that?
It goes for an hour, and it's all different people talking about all the different events they're putting up in all these different cities.
It
and
looks
all the
so MLM. It looks so much like one. And I mean, because like we mentioned before, that you and I worked in the Salt Palace, and a large amount of the business was MLMs. It was one of the things that always struck me, is that, like, because somebody would be up there talking about sales, and like you would just know, like, in less than 7 seconds, like, oh, that's a Mormon, like that guy was a missionary, like he could be a zone leader right now, trying to whip up the elders, that kind of thing, it's all there.
But to be honest about it, is like, you and I, if we tried to like make something like this, it would be herding cats trying to get the type of people who think like us. I mean, like, that's always the problem with the real concept of atheism, is it really is ultimately herding cats.
No, like I don't know.
But
Ex-Mormonism, it's just about it's almost as stupid as the no golfing club. You know, it's like what do? We get together and we do not golf. Yeah, well, what do you do? Not golf.
and these the
It's
thrive thing,
farcical. It's stupid.
yeah, you're hitting it so much because if you listen to this, you realize that at the core of it is not golf. You know what I mean? So no matter what, they always kind of get back to that concept. So you got to deconstruct an end to the not golf thing, and it's I think over time it's not going to be the best of glues to hold it, like in the Durkheimian sense. I always talk about Jonathan Haidt brings up Durkheim a lot, and I like to talk about it a lot too. Durkheim was the father of sociology, but he was an atheist who saw value in religion as something that could gel communities together, and he did a lot of work in that. And I think the core enterprise of this isn't going to be as strong of a gel as a real religion, but I would also agree with him though that whatever they're doing right here is going to gel people together. At least like there'll be a blip of an increase better than I could do it, because I would be
Well, now I wish I had watched all this thing because I'd kind of like to break it down. Because like so, what's
well, we
the
can pick a
product? What
random
are they
time.
selling?
That well, each one of them in a different city or a different area is kind of the organizer of different events.
No, I mean in general. So the Mormon Stories Foundation or Thrive Unite under the auspices of Mormon Story. Because like I mean, what does John say? Because he hasn't. I mean, he won't make it concrete. Because on that episode where he justifies making money, which is fine.
Well,
Again,
he
but
wants to act
he
like
says,
he's separate from this too.
yeah,
So.
but he says like that the reason why there's value in donating to Mormon Stories is that Mormon Stories is what it provides what service to ex-Mormons. I don't know. I don't know how to answer that.
Just
Like
the
I don't
community
even
and
know how
all
to
that stuff.
answer
I mean, I think
it. I
they're
guess
kind of
so.
trying to answer that stuff. But this has always been one of my large arguments of anybody who goes around being a critic of a larger institution is that guess what? When this thing gets as big as say like the Boy Scouts of America was for 100 years, guess what you're going to have down at the end of that, John
Yeah.
Delaney? You're going to have a class action lawsuit.
I feel like that there's a like I mean if I have a religion, if I have a scripture of society, it's South Park. And it's
Yeah,
like the South Park episode with the Walmart, you know,
yep.
where they throw the Walmart out of town, and what immediately happens, you know, the next Walmart takes over, you know.
And I actually think a lot of the symbolism within religion kind of tries to address the point, you know, the kind of the concept of there's always a snake in the garden, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
but it even goes beyond that. But that it seems like a lot of religious texts do have sort of interpretations of things that happen to a people over a bunch of time, over a long period of time.
yeah,
It's like an examination in this sort of weird way. And one of the examinations they notice is that you can't keep you can't make a perfect institution. You can't do it. You can't. It's one of the things that people always come down on, like the Catholic Church, for the situations that they did with like the kids and all that stuff. And you want to know what organization has just as much, if not more, of that in its entire history? The schooling system of the United States of America, and the percentages are higher. You know, it's you can't keep the snakes out of the garden if you get sufficiently large.
yeah.
And these guys will have all the problems a big religion ever had. They'll have all the factioning any big religion ever had, if it goes long enough, if it survives long enough. Because what happens to most of these things, like happened to most religions over time, is they died on the vine. They didn't work. They didn't become a thing,
Yeah.
or they got taken down, like the atheism movement got taken down, as you and I went into only partial detail about. You know.
Yeah. It imploded. Thrive. Unite to thrive.
So let me see if I can find this. I thought it was pretty funny. Hold on.
I wish that I knew how to grab clippos. Did you grab any clips from the Book of Mark thing?
I've got it
John
pulled up,
Larson
but I don't have a clip, but we can just do
We'll
that.
probably have to do that. Might have to do that another time. There's a lot to talk about in there.
I don't know. I think that's kind of where I was going. Of like, let's just go into that and do like.
Well, you're
I'm
driving.
gonna do the whole thing, but maybe like the latter third or something, and just start going. But I don't have an exact moment pulled up. But I was gonna pull this other moment up from another John Lynn thing. I still want to do. We did a whole video on Sunday, and like I sucked up the recording, and then I want to do that whole entire video again because the whole thing is about trying to describe out how the cultural Marxism thing, how sand is thrown in the eyes about it, and how it's real, and how all the
The thing
people
is,
that
like, I don't know, because you want to redo it, but it's like, I don't know. It's kind of like
you
it's like
lost it
redoing a
today.
jam. Yeah, you know.
Well,
Like
it
sometimes
wouldn't go as perfect as that, but at the same time too, there was just so many
about
points that were made that got to be made, you know. But
I guess I was really tired too.
no, it was good.
I'm
Well, it
tired
was
today,
especially
but
good because it was
clearly,
accidentally flowing well. So bad it wasn't
yeah.
flowing well. But let me see if I can
I like
find
to,
it.
yeah, but we did at least an hour without anything happening. But now I can see that it's recording.
Let me see if I can find this. Oh, this isn't even like a clip worth pulling up. I don't need to pull the clip to show it, but it was funny because like they had that street epistemology thing, which is still like man, the problem is he puts out so much stuff and we only have time every so often. We don't live doing this. And I
Yeah.
honestly could put 10 hours a week out of every single thing that he puts out. And I don't even want to be covering them. Like I don't like there's other stuff I want to talk about.
Yeah.
But they come and pump stuff out so fast. But in one of those epistemology videos, he says this is like doing the Hegelian dialectic, just right out of John DeLin's mouth. And I don't think he knows or knew what he was talking about or getting into there. But those same people who are trying to critique James Lindsay, they thought they had a hot take of saying, like, do you realize that the way you do science is by falsification? And falsification is like the Hegelian dialectic, man. No, come on. Oh, I'm gonna pull that clip. Let me before doing that one. Let's look at Boyce, Benjamin Boyce, for a second with counter woke craft, because I don't want to just do a whole
I don't think I saw this thing.
John DeLynn. You didn't see it?
Yeah.
I got a
Well,
couple.
yeah. I mean, I saw. What is it? Benjamin Boyce with the guy who wrote Counter Woke-craft?
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
talking about it. Oh,
Did you see it?
no, I just watched.
So this one I
James
do have a
Lindsay's
couple
like,
clips on. I was gonna do it on that other video that we were doing, but we didn't get to it
Charles
even.
Pincourt is his name.
Yeah. So let's just go over what I had pulled. I was gonna do this just for a couple minutes, and then something from 30 minutes to 40 minutes, and then we'll go back to Lars, and then.
Well, and real quick, talking about how everything's religion. Geez, listen to these trans stories.
Oh yeah,
It
Benjamin
sounds
Boyce.
they're not talking about leaving a church, but you're going to recognize an awful lot of stories about leaving church. It's
Too.
unmistakable.
The reason I even know who Benjamin Boyce is, and other people might, is that he was a documenter of the situations that happened at Evergreen.
Yeah.
Evergreen.
He was a student there. He graduated from Evergreen, right? That's his alma mater.
He was there right at the time frame this whole thing happened, and he's got an extensive story, because this is another area people try to throw sand in your eyes and say, nobody knows what the real story of Evergreen was. If you listen to Brett Weinstein, he lied about it, and that sort of stuff. And you're like, no, we watched moment by moment of it.
Benjamin Boyce has put together 10 hours of documentary,
I think probably more.
there's so much video. Well, I mean, because I haven't even watched it all. There's so much video of that stuff. Yeah, no, and I've had so many people tell me like I will relate things that are said on tape, and people have told me like, oh, it didn't happen like that. You're making that up.
But the problem is we have all the video, and that's the same thing that we brought up last time. Andy No, and Andy No did this long super thread this week about all the hoax, because of the Jesse Smollett thing. He did all the
Evergreen was 2017 or 2016, 2017. That was my introduction to critical race theory. That the first time it went into my brain and stayed as a thing. Like I'm sure I'd heard the words before, but like it's part of that sneaky thing, because like for the longest time when you hear critical theories, critical used in the critical theories Frankfurt School kind of way, like until you've learned about the Frankfurt School and what they actually meant by critical theory, you're doing the thing where you're walking around as a normie thinking that critical means what critical means and not their extra special You're thinking what critical means and theory means what theory means. But when they say critical theory, critical and theory don't mean those words. Yeah.
No. Yeah, it's the Mont and Bailey, and then even beyond all that, it's the same problem with the dialectic and other words like the episteme and all these things, that each different philosopher has their own different little nuanced take of what the actual little word means, and that's one of the ways that there's the endless just stream
It's
of crap.
almost a form of personal revelation.
Yep. But yeah, his videos on the evergreen stuff, if you want your hair blown back, you should watch all those and then realize, because when this happened, a lot of people tried to say, well, that's evergreen, man, that's a wacky dude to play.
I remember specifically trying to tell people about, like, because this was before 2020 and all the riots of that year and all of that, everything blew up in the main media in a way it never had before. And I tried to tell people that, like, at what many people have called the most liberal college in America, and it is a state university, this was testified in front of, like, the state senate. Like, this is like sworn testimony. You can watch this stuff. They've got the phone recordings from the police department. There's evidence of all this. There's receipts. There were roving groups of students with baseball bats stopping cars looking for white people. And looking for a Jewish biology professor specifically.
And you can watch videos of all of it, and beyond just the videos of people being like extremists in that sense, you'll find videos of them saying the extremist theory type stuff that just makes your brain fall
and
out.
That's like, so, like, that's real life, and that's on video. And now, and I hear John Larson, who said we're not going to keep talking about them, but you hear John Larson talk about January 6th.
Oh, I
Like,
mean to talk. I mean to talk about it right now.
Was, but I mean, as bad as January 6th was, where it's like, and everybody condemns it, like, that's the one thing that the right has that the left hasn't, is that the right almost immediately, pretty much universally condemned the whole Capitol shenanigans, the whole Capitol riot.
Well, that's one of the
arguments. There's almost nobody that made a case that justified that.
I think
Compare that to the BLM riots.
I brought that argument. I brought that argument all the way back when Larson was on Facebook. I'm sure it's something he doesn't remember. This, like you were talking the other day, is like there's gnats and people who talk to all the time. But one of Peterson's best arguments is that the right knows how to draw lines between stuff, and the left doesn't know how to, like, everything's got to be include everything in, except, as we know from Marcuse, the repressive tolerance, except for the right. And I think something in the video from last night from Larson shows that he's a full believer in repressive tolerance. But
this was, I don't know, a year ago, but whenever when they were delaying the Supreme Court, they were delaying Amy Coen Barrett, whatever, and it was the political party reversal of the same case from 4 years ago. And like, and I'm acquainted with, and I'm friends with one of my local elected officials, and and they posted something on their Facebook, about, like, this is, we cannot allow, he's a Democrat, obviously, we cannot allow them to seat this person, we have to delay this, blah, blah, blah. So I just scrolled through time back to when it was the reverse, and it was Mitch McConnell delaying them seating a Democrat, and his post on that. And all I did was I did a screenshot of that and pasted that. And, and this guy's a lawyer, and his argument, I'm like, I called him out directly. I'm like, you're being a hypocrite. Like, it's really obvious to me that political parties change your position on this, and he's like, no, this is different. And I mean, I could go look it up, but it really came down to, like, this is different because Republicans are jerks.
Yeah,
it was just Marcusian thinking just played out in real time, where it's like, no, this isn't about a principle. This isn't about due process. This isn't about being fair or being consistent. No, Republicans are jerks. We have to stop them. Whereas, like, before, rule of law, due process. It's important to honor the system and be consistent. Like, no, it's instant.
So to reiterate. Yeah, I think Marcuse is probably one of the real true, like, immediately in the family tree granddads of modern day critical theory stuff, because a lot of times when you're talking about, like, Adorno or Horkheimer or even Gramsci, what we have in our modern versions of that came filtered through Marcuse. And it all really just started with Marcuse, and then Angela Davis and other people in like those 1960s movements taking his Marxist Hegelian ideas and blending them with postmodernist ideas, and that's what we get all the modern wacky-dooness with. And so he's really kind of like a direct ancestor in the line. And one of his main concepts, which I think seeps into the left, as you and I always talk about, not every parishioner is a preacher, that sort of deal, but it just permeates the entirety of the left. And I can show how it permeates in Larson, is the repressive tolerance. And that repressive tolerance is that right-wing speech is violence and left-wing violence is speech. And it's really literally laid out like that. And it's kind of funny because James Lindsay did some great podcasts on it, but part of why they're great is because he read the whole thing, and people sit there saying that it didn't say that, it doesn't say this, it doesn't do the whole thing. Like, we're reading the exact thing. You can read the exact thing. I read the whole entire thing after that too, but they'll still throw sand in your eyes. Like, it doesn't say that when you're just sitting there reading it. But that's part of their politics, is that you don't need to be consistent or honest. You just need to have the right heart. You need to have the right heart.
Well, you and I both went to school in suburban Utah, and it's already a very conservative place. And because like if you'd hear people talk like, oh, the conservative Mormon school system in Utah surely was ultra conservative, but like my experience in school was that like
no,
conservative political stuff was sensitive and not talked about. Whereas like, I mean, like I had an English teacher that like we did school projects built around PETA literature. Like that was part of our grade. That was my introduction to PETA, which is like, like looking back on it, I was like, no, and I had like there was a class, it was great. Where because like one of my teachers was kind of an interesting lady, but she was like, I realize now, was like very much a product of this Marcusian type education pedagogy, like the way they taught her. And she arranged to have like a special thing where a Navajo lady came to us like once a week for like the whole year, and we did this whole special thing on Navajo culture, and she had like was personally connected with these people, and like to make a very long story short, like she more or less was bearing her testimony to us about her experience with Navajo religion, which like I loved it, but even as a kid I was like, you shouldn't be doing this, lady. But the other thing that where she ties into this is that like one of the lessons was like, oh, we're going to make Navajo fry bread, and we need some volunteers to make the bread. And my hand shot up because I'm like, wow, of course I want to learn how to make Navajo fry bread. I love cooking all this stuff. And the teacher, I remember her saying something about like, thank you for defying gender roles. And I just remember thinking like, no, I want to make bread. Like, I'm not doing this. Is not a political statement. I'm hungry.
Well, I mean, I lived that out, especially at the university level myself, and I had a bit of a. I usually try to say that like the essence of me is somebody who you could say like at one moment I had the that little Mormon ex-Mormon cliche moment of you found out it was all whatever. I had that moment way more from the university and the whole entire schooling system than I ever had it from any sort of religion. It's just like realizing like, wait a minute, all these PhDs are just people who make crazy assertions and launder in each other's assertions and call it academia, and it broke my head. But that was here in Utah, and BYU, the Mormon church school that we had some podcasts on that this week, they were a little bit later to start adopting it, but they've adopted it every ounce, every bit as much as ever.
Yeah, no, I didn't finish college, and a large part of it was a disillusionment because like I remember my first year of community college, my American civilization teacher told us a whole bunch of lies about his personal life that I actually like, I investigated this stuff. He said that he was a linebacker for the Denver Broncos, that he played bass in like a Motown band. But then like, and that was like the minor stuff, because he also told us about how I think AIDS was created by the KGB, because everybody knew that the CIA liked to use gay spies because they couldn't be honeypotted.
Oh, God.
And he told a story about how he got plucked off of a rooftop in Istanbul by Black Hawk helicopters because he and a team of archaeologists in conjunction with the CIA had found Noah's Ark. And like, and I'm like, God damn it, this is college. And I was like, oh dear. And
Yeah.
like, and I mean, he gave the same lecture twice, one day after the other, and nobody called him on it. Like, nobody stopped him. He gave the exact same 3-hour lecture. Like, and I just had this moment of like, oh God, like this guy, this is college. Yeah, just that. Like, oh dear.
The
And granted,
monkeys
that
are
was
running the
community
show.
college, but still. And then the other thing was that same year in my other class, I had to tell my English teacher what the words ideologue and litigious meant. He
Ugh.
didn't know what those words were. I had like, and I'm just like, oh dear, I don't. Yeah.
Well, those
Because
are obviously like arenas of incompetence, but I'm
yeah.
talking about in my arenas there were competent ideologues.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the part where they don't know anything. I mean, that's the other thing, is that like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've been acquainted with a lot of academic types, including political science professors, and just as like a friend trying to talk to my political science professor friend, like over years, like it was always and still is extremely hard to talk anything about politics. And I remember once, this was many years ago, and I was just at his house, like we were, normally our common interest is soccer. That's the number one thing we do together. But I was over there, like, you teach political science. What is Marxism? Because people are talking about Marxism a lot. Like, what does that mean today? And instead of getting anything like an answer, like it all devolved. It reminded me a lot of like going to my bishop, or better example of like when I went to my stake president and said like, why can't we have playing cards? Exactly. Where like you think it's just a simple question and that there's a simple answer, and I found out like, oh no, I'm an asshole for asking.
So I lived that out hardcore at the University of Utah once I got into graduate school, and suddenly we were supposed to do critical theory on everything, and I did not know I was getting into that. I was recruited into it, but
Yeah.
I did not know that was what the concept was, and I didn't know what was going on. Even the idea of saying critical theory is a thing didn't make sense very much to me at that moment,
Yeah.
and suddenly we're doing all these like reading Foucault and reading Derrida and having to read all these books through the lens of those people to write our papers, and we had no option but to do that. And I didn't know what was going on, and I took all sorts of professors, not just in my department. I even went in like the crossover departments and talked to some of the feminist professors and all that stuff, and I took their office hour time to go in and say, explain this to me. What is this? What are we doing? What is this stuff?
It's like
And
when
it was
missionaries
all
would go
just
through all the trouble. Did it ever happen in your mission where like, because they talk about if you have questions about the temple, don't talk about the temple outside of the temple. And if you have questions, you can make an appointment with the temple president and you can ask your questions there. And I knew some people, I knew some missionaries that actually went through all this rigmarole.
Yeah.
And we came back like, so what happened? And they're like, no answers.
So
he's like, that was the biggest waste of time.
The now famous book by Stephen Hicks that explains postmodernism, I went and scoured the library looking for that book. Not that I knew Stephen Hicks existed, but I wanted some sort of oversight explanation, because I was released into the middle of it without knowing what the heck it was.
I interrupted your good story. Like, you went from professor to professor and trying to find an answer, and what were the answers?
It was just complete obfuscation. I mean, it was
Was
so
it the
much
same
edging.
answer, or was it different answers?
It was the same dodge. Nobody answered anything, and the part of the problem was like, I think they were on a meta level caught up in their head about postmodernism, in the sense of, well, I can't define it outright exactly, or I'll be saying something too specific that will be. So it was like part pulling the punches to hedge, because part of the whole postmodernism problem is you couldn't define it or you're an idiot, you know.
Yeah.
And they were partially doing that. And I honestly think, especially at that time frame, because 20 years ago, it was pure Lacan, it was pure Derrida. Go read Derrida and Lacan and come back, read 5 pages of it and come back and explain it to me. I honestly think a lot of those professors didn't have answers because they didn't know very well. You know, like it was back at that time frame. It almost kind of took the critics to kind of start explaining it out to really kind of make it more clear of what they were in some sort of senses. But if you were just reading it from the inside of it, there was so much jargon. Like the original Sokol hoax was this guy named Alan Sokol, who hoaxed postmodernism, and he was able to hoax it just by writing complete gibbly, you know. He wrote all this kind of Deepak Chopra-y type gibberish, and that worked because that's how that sort of postmodernism read, you know. The newer Sokol hoax people couldn't do that because they got a little bit more plain with their language. But back then, I think that's part of how it got laundered into the universities, is because it just sounded so complex and so super smart that it just must be something that I guess we got to be doing. And honestly, when I went and talked to each one of those professors, there was half a game of they didn't want to describe it because they knew they shouldn't describe it, and then there was half a game that I don't think they could describe it. Like even me, like right now, I've tried many times, and I do think I sort of get it. I'm able to describe Derrida, but I also can't describe Derrida. And also part of the problem with Derrida is Derrida insisted that every single description of him was wrong and incorrect. But that's also Derrida's way of defining something. You define something by saying that, no, it's not that, and no, it's incorrect, and no, you know, he's doing a negation and negation. You know, he like, that's why I say he like lived like this Andy Kaufman-esque experience of, well, we can't
See, that's
call it that
and
word.
like you're summarizing this, and you had this spread out over 4 years, you know. But
Well, so I had
imagine, 'cause,
a
like,
bit
it
of
sounds nuts hearing you just talk about it, because like really, but like I know from as much as because you know I haven't gone and read all of this stuff,
so
but as much as I've dug into it, like everything is what you say it is. You know, it's not like
I had some imposter syndrome. I was just reading like some Stanford review of Judith Butler, and the Stanford review is like, it still might seem gobbledygook to somebody new to it, but it's pretty clear. But that Stanford review is not the gobbledygook that Judith Butler wrote. You got to read Judith Butler to see the original source. You got to read that gobbledygook because it's gobbledygook. And there was so much of that at that time frame, and we were just kind of half trying to figure it out. Maybe one of the more clear persons, although I still think he's kind of gobbledygooky, is Foucault. So of course I glommed on to Foucault and would use Foucault in my papers more than other people because he somewhat made sense. But the going and talking to the different professors, not getting answers. I'm telling you this right now. I wrote a paper. I got that paper accepted into a literary conference. I went and presented that paper at the literary conference. I read that paper. I sat there looking out at those professors' faces, and I'm telling you right now, I saw complete blank stares of I don't know what he's talking about. And I know that when they got up and gave their papers, I was like, I don't know what they're talking about. And I'm telling you, there was like, at that time frame, there was a great big mishmash of people not quite knowing what they're talking about, sitting there calling themselves professors. And
you graduated with honors, right?
Yeah, but I had 1 A minus, and the only reason I had an A minus was that professor was wrong because he said I missed an exam, and I know I didn't miss the exam because I didn't miss any school. So I didn't even argue with him. There were so many times back then I was so docile. Like the whole concept of me getting out of academia, like this sort of stuff really ran me out of academia, and I did it thinking I was doing an honorable thing, you know. And all this stuff, as you went reading it and trying to figure it out. So I saying I had imposter syndrome. Like I was a bit of a jock in high school, and I read and did stuff, but in high school I more ran around and screwed around. I wasn't like in any AP classes or any sort of stuff like that. I had a pretty good ACT and all that, but so by the time I was in school and doing that, like I really learned on my mission how to study. It wasn't really till my mission that I started realizing like, hey, I get stuff. I can get stuff. I can pick up Spanish maybe faster than some other people. I understand things, you know, and I don't know why, but like my youth, it seemed kind of like a fog. People would say you're smart or whatever, but it didn't click for me, you know. And then I'm not saying like I'm like I don't know what smart I am, because I don't think my grades say anything about it, but all I knew is that I was able to get stuff. But I had this imposter syndrome, like I missed a bunch of reading. Like there was a part of me that when I was running around asking those professors and trying to do the extra reading that everybody else wasn't doing, there was a part of me that thought it's because they all already know and they've all already read it. Does that make sense? And I was wrong. Even the professors hadn't read it, many of them, you know. And so I went running around reading and reading extra and reading more, and even reading years after because of that imposter syndrome. And then at some point along the way, when I get in debates and talk with people, I'd find out that even people like certain degrees hadn't read the stuff and hadn't read much of it, you know. In fact, there was like a level, like when I talk about the stuff that was assigned to me by like Lacan or Derrida in school, it'd be like randomized clips out of books that you couldn't even like kind of figure out where the book was or what it was. And so then I'd go read more of the whole book trying to get my brain around it. But what ultimately the students graduating got from was like a mishmash of crap, you know, just thrown at them that they were supposed to sort out and make sense of. And that was all the way back then at a place that was kind of turning postmodern. Then some around the 2012s, with these more modern day theories, the theories started getting more obvious and plain in their language, like taking the word hegemony and changing that word hegemony into white supremacy, you know. And so you see, not only there's a thing there of like increase the Marxist conflict theory, because the word hegemony isn't going to upset anybody, but it's also getting more plain. It's getting more direct with what we're talking about. And now I think they were able to partially do that because they had such institutional capture. You got enough institutional capture, you can stop pretending like we're these highly technical writers, you know, and you just get more plain in the language about, yeah, this is what we're doing, this is what we're trying to accomplish. And anyway,
I'm sure somebody got a whole like it was a whole thesis of let's just start speaking plainly so people can understand us. And I'm sure there's
I might have
graduations all around like, wow, what an amazing, this is
I might have already said it on here, but like I'd critique like John Larson, like suddenly talking like he's some smart guy explaining to us what white supremacy is from this new Mott and Bailey term. There was I know the year that the memo was sent out that we're officially changing it to white supremacy now. And some people have been calling that for years, but like when everywhere said, hey, we're going to kind of chill out on the word hegemony and we're going to ramp up the white supremacy, somewhere around 2017. And Jonathan Haidt had the memo, like he had like the being part of the NYC School of Ethics and all that stuff, and he put out a warning. He said, hey, this is the year the word hegemony is getting memory hold, and the word white supremacy is coming in. There's no more pretending that it's this fancy technical term, you know. And he said, well, everybody should maybe resist this, but of course there's no resisting it. The dialectic happens. And I think they started getting more plain and everything, but at the same time too, that's part of I had a video for that the other day. Part of the issue is that they're getting found out. It's getting more plain and easy to find them out. And as they go getting found out, this stuff, you'd think it like fizz out, but it ramps up even worse. But part of what this whole thing with Benjamin Boyce is right here, I mean, we know it got wild at Evergreen, but this professor here who wrote Counter Wokecraft, he was just another professor who was in the world who was just trying to do his professorship and found out that the stuff came and overtook his planet. So he felt the duty to try to talk about going against it, because he never wanted it in his world, but it came to his world. And just like me, at some point, like I shrugged it off back when I left the university. I mean, that was already bad enough. They chased people like you and me out of wanting careers in education when we're guys who all we do is read every day and try to learn and try to explain stuff every day. And one of the worlds that was not open to us was thinking about going through academia, you know. And these guys kind of start noticing it. People who are already in academia, they didn't know that it was pushing into all the other fields, and then they slowly all kind of start noticing it and slowly start pushing back. And now the stuff's getting named, and getting named is a problem for them. And
Yeah.
so let's start there.
And but I whatever.
Intentionally so, some might argue.
Yes, yeah. Many have argued, and I think it's probably not inaccurate. And it ties into one of the principles that I talk about in the book, which is go unnoticed until it's too late. And so you can obviously
go unnoticed until it's too late is the point there. Is like it is now that it's getting plain and people are noticing it. There is a level of but too late,
Yeah.
And that's somewhat by design. It might sound like conspiracy wise, but
no, it's just, I mean, like, it was like BLM when everybody started going like, hey, here's all this stuff about them talking about how they're Marxists. And even though they tried to kind of scrub their side a bit, like, it's not like they denounced it. They said, oh, no, that was all a mistake. That was Brigham Young was just a racist. We repudiate all that. No. It's all still there.
Yeah,
we know.
They didn't change.
Yeah, like you're still, it's still a Marxist operation.
Yep.
Skate and people don't really understand and they don't really notice what's going on. But anyhow, all that to say that I was thinking about this, breaking down the worldview, and as Holmes was talking about it in terms of metaphysics, epistemology, and then how those kind of flow into your political philosophy. And so that first little section is written a little bit like that. The big three axioms are that all knowledge is socially constructed. So that's Lindsay or Pluckrose and Lindsay's knowledge principle. And not only is knowledge constructed, but it's constructed in such a way so as to advantage the oppressors to the disadvantage of the oppressed. So that's the political principle. And then a third principle that I coined is the subject principle, and that's that individuals are really just a function, or primarily a function, of their identities, and they behave according to their identities, and there's only so much control they have over that. And so people themselves, knowingly or unknowingly, serve to perpetuate these existing power structures. And
that's the part of why I get irritated to talk about that. So many of my internet arguments are preambles. They're preambles about, are you somebody who thinks I can have an opinion, or do you think that I'm just an identity and Agent Smith for that identity? And we almost never get anywhere with it. But the other end of it is, then after that is just getting somebody to define or admit if they are or are not somebody who buys or believes into all this stuff, or are not a Marxist. And then we never even get to the meat of the matter. Is Marxism good or bad? I'd be fine having that argument with some people, and some people start out as what the critical theorists call vulgar Marxists, who they don't play all these games. They just start out from, I'm a Marxist, and then we can get right into the arguments about Marxists. Those do exist. But those people get just as criticized by this movement as anybody. In fact, the whole entirety of critical race theory, the movement, started off of calling critical legal studies a vulgar Marxist institution that needed to advance itself, and they differentiated themselves from that.
And
there's no way not to.
Well, I mean, there's sort of a funny thing here, because the woke, in a way, like the whole story about being woke is being awakened to that particular principle, the subject principle, that we are subject to these things and we have to be aware of it, and we have to.
And that thing about everything is socially constructed, it goes so far down a rabbit hole that the epistemology of it is it's just crazier than any sort of magic Kwaku from the Midnight Mormons might talk about, or anything. It's by far.
Oh yeah, it works exactly like that. It works exactly like sinful nature, right? Or like, I mean, Scientology has engrams, and then further on body thetans, but yeah, there's this whole idea that like, oh yeah, you're not bad. There's something out there making you bad.
And I would say the reason why I put it like I rank it way nuttier than just like a religious worldview is because in this socially constructed worldview, it really breaks down kind of like what even is this existence that we're sitting in here. It's all just some sort of
Yeah.
language socially constructed. It's kind of
Oh.
becomes almost solipsistic, but not because
I really wonder if it like comes down to like a type of psychology, because like I can understand the argument, but I can't see it. Like when it like I mean like the first time I ever heard about like patriarchy as feminists describe it, and like the way that what it comes down to is that all of civilization is constructed for the benefit of men at the expense of women. Where it's like,
Yeah.
like I understand what you're saying and I understand your arguments, but like I can't even see that. Like I even in my limited understanding, or like the Marxist view of economics, like even in my simple understanding, I can see how like, well, that's obviously not how the world works.
Yeah.
I mean, one of these things about this is like, yeah, it's like Marxism only makes sense if people are somehow not animals, because if people are animals, then you have to apply all this shit to the rest of the natural world, and then where do you end up?
Yep.
Like,
It's all just a social construct. And
yeah.
that goes so far, it gets crazy. But beyond that, it's
So like, yeah,
like what I usually say is why somebody with a magic worldview has less of an epistemological problem than people with this worldview is like the person with the magic worldview probably agrees that like I can know things like I can know that I'm a male, I can know that I'm a
Yeah.
male and it's not just a performance and I'm not just an acted upon,
yeah, it means
being,
something.
Well,
yeah, and I was just thinking about this the other night, because I think a lot about languages, and talking about like Latinx, and then I've been studying a little bit of Arabic, and while like Arabic is a gendered language, the whole gender thing there with grammar gets even weirder than it is in Romance languages, and I barely understand it. But I was thinking about this because like in you've got the chicken and egg problem, like in their weird socially constructed thing, like one day some proto-Arabic or proto-Latin speaker was like, what would really show those women is if we make our language have grammatical gender, and and we'll use that to oppress, and like, and, I mean, just immediately it's like, what are you talking about? And like it makes a lot more sense that like our ancestors lived in a natural world, and like like hunting mammals.
yeah.
There's a reason you kill the boy ones and not the girl ones, and our ancestors understood that intuitively, and so it makes sense like why you have linguistic categories to differentiate gender. It's not just to make queer kids feel bad and want to hurt themselves. Like it's just like and they make that logical leap. Like.
And then they'll go farther with like how powerful the words are, because like
Yeah.
one of the transferences to the concrete that somebody like Butler, you could say, did is they notice in this Derridian way that you don't have like a good word or language, or that a word shifts, like the word, even maybe let's say like the concept of pink, or what the word gay means, or something like that, that because the meaning of that shifts, then the actual thing also shifts.
Yeah.
The words have magic on the reality, and so because we start calling a male or a female a different term, or a different, or we think that it doesn't quite make sense in this situation here because we don't have like a good word to figure the thing out, it means the actual thing is just as shifty.
The South Park episode, the F word, is it's one of my favorite episodes. It's one of my favorite social lessons about words. It's got one of my favorite South Park quotes in it with, "Oh, they think we mean gay fags. That's not cool, Mayor. Just because somebody's gay doesn't mean he's a fag." And that episode is all about this exact thing we're talking about, and people should watch it. For me, it's like, to me, it's like an allegory just as important as anything out of the Bible of like just an important life lesson.
Well, and to talk all the way
but
back to death of the author stuff. Now that you've said that on the stream, we could get in trouble because they're not going to take into to view at all the
you have
intent
to
or
beep that out. Yeah.
yeah. But that gets back to the structuralists, because I mean, I think the structuralists did do kind of an interesting job of kind of sorting out how language is shifty, but you can still peg it down by what it's in related to, you know.
Yeah.
And then the post-structuralists were like, nope, nope, nope. Even the signifier and the signified are just as shifty. The word dog shifts, and the word and what we mean by dog shifts, and it's endlessly shifty. And even to you yourself personally, it doesn't mean the same thing 2 minutes later. And because your brain won't even think of the same dog 2 minutes later, and it's changed so much, the reality of that's also changed. The reality of is that the reality is just as shifty, just because the meaning's as shifty. And shut up. And let's go to school for this and sit here teaching this to a bunch of kids all day, every day, and make them read every single book and paper through this, and then add in the level of the Foucauldian power dynamic to it, that the only reason those meanings shift and what they're shifting to is the power, the superpowers of the white hegemony, and we gotta let's put our kids through that. Let's just send all our kids off to college to just sit and do that all day. We'll start from the humanities, and then we'll move out somewhere else, and then we'll send those same kids to maybe not to the college, but just they'll pick it up from everywhere. That what they got to do is do that to their religion, although they didn't do that specifically to their religion. Like what I say most times in those religions, they just kind of going through like a falsification process. Oh, but these guys getting hazy with their words, they'll call the dialectic a falsification process. It's not a falsification process. I mean, that's the Aufheben is not falsifying something in a scientific way. The scientific way is looking to find something false, and if it's not false.
And how many of the people that said that know better, and how many of them are just
they knew that
because I mean there's like 9,000 million people in the last 6 months have said like critical race theory is just a law school thing. And they all said that it was all a received opinion. None of them knew that. It was just something they saw said on the news and assumed was true. Yeah, that's what I really wonder. Because because I don't believe anybody's had any like serious amount of training in dialectics that would say that, oh, it's just a falsification process, unless they knew they were lying. Although I kind of wonder though, it's like, I mean, and when we say they know they're lying, it's like when we were missionaries.
They're
and we said stuff
like utilitarian consequentialists, and the point that they'll get to is that any sort of like obfuscation or lie or reason, if it helps bring people to the party,
lying for the Lord.
Okay. Lying for the Lord. And we go back to like doing a direct comparison to that. I honestly think like it hurts me to make like more comparisons to it, because I honestly think the academic level side of it is worse than it is, more insidious. Like there is some sort of level on the Mormon side that they really are just trying to maintain something that's they think is good or something like that. Whereas the other side is cynically on a meta level, knowing that they're messing with you on purpose to deconstruct you.
I think you're right.
Be conscious and then behave differently. So once we have that identity consciousness, or the consciousness of the fact that we have been subjected, then we can fight against the structures that exist.
Structures.
And so if we
the world, the culture.
So I do think on that sort of level, well, I mean, he is talking about more modern wokeism. On that sort of level, you get that going on in the world of the ex-Mormon community. I mean, that's kind of what they're doing. Is like, if we get that person deconstructed enough, there'll be somebody who's ready to fight against the powers that be.
So there's a strange thing. I mean, it seems like a strange thing that they're the ones who think it's so important, but at the same time, it's key to their becoming awoken, or awoken. That's right, awoken and being able to resist.
Hashtag resist.
Exactly. So those are the three axioms as I see them, and those kind of blend, or they work into the political philosophy, or the ethos, which is well, I don't know how deep down this rabbit hole we want to go, but if we're thinking about like what the epistemology is and what the metaphysics are of it, that if you have a worldview like that, and I talk about this a little bit at the beginning as well, like what does that imply for what the world is really like? And so ultimately, we don't really know very much about what the world's like in theory, like if you look at the knowledge and the political principles, but in reality, with the worldview, you have to accept a certain number of things as being real. You have to accept that groups exist. You have to accept that people exist. You have to accept that identities exist. History. That's right. History exists. You have to accept that words exist and that language exists and that power structures exist. There's a whole pile of things that you have to kind of latch onto as the bedrock of the worldview. And so it's one of these strange conflicts and contradictions as well within the worldview. Like everything's relative except for like these axioms.
Yeah.
But so you have this like world that exists.
It's always so torturesome, and I live through it too, and you live through it too, trying to explain it out, because it is such a hodgepodge of a mess of ideas, but there is some sort of level that people got to sort it out to realize what they're really dealing with here.
Is it just because it's so much easier than having to do real thinking? I don't know. Like, because I really struggle. Like, I've always wondered, what is the appeal of this? I guess there's the feeling of righteousness.
Dead honestly, some of those professors, what they gave me as the reasons for why we had to do critical theory when we were reading the books is because all of the other scholarship was already done. It's a little bit of that thing that you get with atonal music, where they say all the tonal music is done, so now we must do the atonal music. And there is some sort of truth on the level of that all the construction side of stuff is pretty laid out, but I don't think it's done. I mean, I think you can there's kind of a concept in my brain that, like, if I was a cookie maker, I could always tomorrow try to make that cookie a little bit better and make another cookie,
Well, and also you still need to teach people how to do it,
Yeah.
It's like the next generation needs to know how to build houses too. So you teach engineering,
And it should have been, because like so much of what this does, like go back to that Simpsons clip, is kids, they really do. It's hard to explain to people, but they'll go to some of these university classes and they'll not learn what a sonnet is or how to do, antithesis and rhyming. They'll do it. They're just going to learn Shakespeare was racist. Let's point out to his words how his words have power in them, and these power dynamics demonstrate his view of a Jewish person or something like that.
I don't remember what school is, because this was a few years ago, but the news went around about how some big university's English department announced like Shakespeare is no longer part of an English degree.
Yeah, it's
just astounding. It's really astounding, and it's also kind of hard to hide what you're doing there. Like, yeah.
But this was their next clip's here. I'll go to it and get through it, because the next little bit here is
we always go long.
Yeah, this next little bit here is talking about how their exuberance might be their own downfall of that sort of stuff. Because I think Peterson always said universities are stupid to think that they're bigger than Shakespeare. They're going to lose. If you want to say we're more important and have come up with better canon now than Shakespeare will win that.
And so I think there is an element of that, this moral relativity, and also argumenting around that and using the tools of argumentation and rhetoric actually to be able to push a particular viewpoint and not necessarily trying to get to the bottom of things.
That's a really good point, and you dedicate a significant portion of this book to just going.
I still haven't pulled the clip, and it should have been the first clip I ever did, because I think it's one of the most important points, is that Jonathan Haidt clip of activism versus truth, and that was just a repeat of that. What he just said right there is like, instead of getting to the bottom of things, your whole goal is to push an angle, and my contention is the ex-Mormon world falls into that as much as any world.
Yeah. And like, I don't know, again, the beginning part where you're unpacking, like, wait a second, because you believed all this stuff and you have to like untangle all of the lies and whatnot. But then, like, yeah, once you're done with that, I mean, like, that's the thing that I never got. I mean, that blew my mind watching so much of the ex-Mormonism go woke. Is that like, and also just in general, like having gone through the new atheism phase and seeing my friends, not even necessarily ex-Mormons, but going woke, and I'm like, we spent all of that time talking about cognitive bias and logical fallacies and emotional traps and all this stuff. You didn't seem to learn anything. Like, you're just going right at it from another direction now,
Yeah.
And
And
yeah,
my other warning, if it should be a warning or not a warning, is that I do think Mormon apologists, they're getting better at being honest and looking at stuff and addressing stuff than they used to be. And
no, yeah, Kwaku is doing more for Mormonism than Dan Peterson has done in his career.
and those things can flip. They can flip on people as fast as anything. And maybe that's how it's supposed to go or something like that. Because if Mormonism's, I listened to this podcast by Quick just yesterday, and the whole entire podcast was about doubt and all these people who, I don't think 10, 20 years ago, you would have seen them put a podcast out about expressing doubt as part of the process and going through a whole entire, and I mean, they, not maybe like they said back in the day, but like they really expressed doubt, and they really expressed stuff like, coming into saying the words "I know" at a more slow rate or something like that, not just blasting out there because you should just say that. And they're refining and getting more. Well, I can't say that all the way because the Mormon Church inside of it has just as much as a problem with this stuff as.
Well, things are changing. Did you see the news today?
Yeah.
About the new. Did you see Church News today? They've published the latest edition of the handbook. And it's funny, it doesn't tell you what's allowed, but apparently you don't have to just play piano or organ. They're gonna allow
There's
other
new
instruments in
instruments.
the chapel. Like
Oh,
again, it doesn't say, it says like, for different cultures and instruments for different styles, musical styles or whatever. But yeah, like
my opinion,
that's the thing, like, I never imagined I would see in my lifetime is
my honest opinion is that if Mormonism can stem off the wokeness from inside of it and keep kind of on the routes that they're going, that they'll figure it out, that they'll become something stronger and better and more honest and everything. And the just as long as they too avoid the double-edged sword of falling into this stuff.
What if, imagine, like, how many years are we away from Mormon worship band with guitar, drums, the whole bit?
We already got it. Imagine Dragons, man. No, but he fell into the
he's
woke
woke
side.
now. Yeah, he belongs to a different sect.
If Mormons can keep pushing on addressing, like, open face addressing some of their stuff and just pushing on and being good people and maybe staving off this stuff, my prediction is they got a future. If they fall into the woke stuff, I mean, part of the thing with the woke stuff with all of us is if we all fall into just the woke stuff, is it's the Hegelian futures. We're all just going to be the same thing. And it's one of my largest jokes about this whole entire thing is that the wokeness inside of Mormon religion is doing more to change the religion than John DeLynn and those goofs are ever doing, if they thought they were doing something. And some of the pressures they get from like the money that Larson reels about, that money is going to change the Mormon Church more than Larson is. Like, the way the woke capital pushes on organizations and requires certain things of them now, that exact money that they're so mad about, that money is what the bigger danger is of turning them into exactly what John Larson wants them to be. It's the ring, it's the ring of it's the ring of power. The more they hold on to that, the more.
That's something else. Like, I mean, I guess I think it's just maybe something about my attitude but like I like that Mormons are Mormons.
Yeah, me too.
And I don't, and in fact, it's something that's funny. Like I don't know why I've spent so much time thinking about it, but like for a decade or more than a decade, I thought about like that how gay culture I think is going to lose a lot because of acceptance. And I'm not saying that this isn't an argument
Well, you
against
can use
gay
the queer
acceptance.
theorists. You could
Yeah.
use the queer theorists to say, because they also make that same
Well,
argument.
but they try to make it into like a big moral thing, and for me, it's just a consequence of reality.
Yeah.
But like so much of gay culture is a product of it being underground, an underground thing. I mean, and just now, like, because I mean, like, I don't know. I work with a 65-year-old gay guy and a 25-year-old gay guy, and I just get tripped out, because like one of those guys lived through the AIDS pandemic in the early '80s, and like, and you talk to any gay guy over 60, and they get the 1,000-yard stare when you talk about AIDS in the '80s, and just what that whole thing was, and like young 25-year-old gay guy, like he never lived in a world that wasn't basically affirming to him,
Mhm.
as a sexual being. Yeah, and the differences are stark. Yeah, and I know, and I wonder, and I like, for me, like I'd be sad to see it go, like or like,
That's
for
why
example,
I
like
want to
another
pull
thing,
that.
I've had the same thought about like weed culture,
Yeah.
because like even when I was a Mormon teenager, I believed in legalization just as a practical libertarian matter, but also like I
I'd
don't.
say atheist culture is that same thing, because
Oh
there
yeah.
was some sort of sense of it back in the early 2000s that we were in the in some sort of counterculture,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. I don't. That battle seems pretty. I don't know. Like, I mean, I just don't hear about Christian dominionism as much as I used to. Like, it seems like it weird, but like the Christian American right in general seems to have pretty well settled into like a classical American Bill of Rights style of libertarianism.
Yeah.
Where they're like, let us be Christians in our little communities.
Yeah, the only thing
and
pushing
we'll
on them
let
is
people be that. Yeah.
what's pushing on them now is the wokeness inside of their own religion. It's like the
Yeah.
atheists aren't. Some of that wokeism turns people into the atheists, or what they claim to be atheists, but the all those institutions are getting turned more from their people on the inside than some sort of
Yeah.
a kind of class on the outside. The truth to power speakers, as Larson called himself. Let's do a little more of this.
Going through the different rhetorical techniques that they use, Mott and Bailey, Trojan horse. You go through the language, and you just make very explicit, insofar that can be explicit, and it's just a snapshot of what's going on right now. And what I've noticed is that they always change their language once a word gets smoked out, right?
Mhm.
So within Evergreen, you watch these different words, diversity and inclusion, and then it becomes equity, and then becomes inclusive excellence and student
Yes.
success. And so even though you're pointing to these words, there's probably the techniques beneath those words that people can recognize the pattern, even though the language is going to keep on changing.
Yeah.
That's not just with this. I mean, that's back to
Yeah.
our Marxism thing. Like, all the Marxism has just been Marxism all the time, but
Yeah.
they once the reason it has to duck, hide, change, and rearrange itself is because it didn't work and people didn't like it.
Yeah.
And
They have
so
a
then
they have a
Right.
PR problem. They have a
Yeah.
brand association problem.
so half of all these language games aren't just being hoity-toity philosophers with it. It is exactly what you're saying, PR problem.
Because they have
Yeah.
to change it.
Well, that's a really interesting point, actually, the adaptive nature of the language itself. It's funny because some of the words haven't adapted, like some of the key ones, like the word critical. I think it's extraordinary that it hasn't adapted somehow.
I think the ones that don't adapt are because they're perfect Mott and Bailey's. Like, it's going to forever have the real definition to it. And then
Yeah. That one's hard.
has remained there for as long, I mean, back until or back, at least the New Left, that word critical started to become very important. And I thought that people had smoked it out, but it like you said, I thought that was a good expression, but I still see it being used and people still being duped by it. But the there's one part of the book where I kind of allude to that, but now that you mentioned it, I wish I'd spent a little bit more time on it, getting at the dynamic or the mechanism underneath it, because there certainly is something there. And the way I talk about it in the book is to be on the lookout for these words. So the second you hear a word that is used in a context you haven't heard it before, and it sounds strange and it makes you feel uncomfortable, that's when you should be going, oh, okay, hang on a second. That's a weird way to use that word.
Well, one of the places you and I will joke about it a lot, and I think sometimes when we do it, people might not know what we're talking about. But some of those big Mott and Bailey words that seem to have big other meanings are some of those Marxist words like science and history and economics. The economics of history, the history of science. It's science. It's economic. Those are. What he's saying there is a good example of maybe try to start picking out when they're doing that. You can hear it just come up in a place that it kind of just jars your head of like, what? Like, why did you just say science? Like, I looked into the history and it's science, and but those are kind of more, those were done all the way back with the Marxist, the Leninist Marxists, but that's what's kind of interesting about the way the woke have done stuff, is that it really does have like a tradition in it that precedes postmodernism. Like,
the words historical materialism together tell you basically nothing about what it means.
And then the same that
if anything, you know less. In fact, having heard the words historical materialism, you now know negative information about historical materialism compared to what it actually means. Or they say dialectical materialism, and that could mean the same thing. But no, it's technically a different thing because that word was us. They're interchangeable, but it's different.
It's different because one was the way Lukács wanted to say it, and the other one was
and they argued about other things, so therefore that's different.
How could they be Marxist, or these people be Marxist? They were critics of Marxists. They were critics of Marxists. Don't you know that? Well, the answer to that is they thought the other person should have been more Marxist, and they were like, no, I'm more Marxist, you be more Marxist. But then they'll throw the smoke in their face and say, well, how could these people, like, these guys were critics of Marx?
Exactly.
And that's exactly how these words become weaponized, and it's those contexts. And so there's I don't know if you would have seen this part, but I kind of go through a series of ways of categorizing what are explicit woke words, so that people can identify them. Like they have X's in them, or they're words that normally you'd think of as good, but that are used as though they were negative.
It's gonna be hard because I mean that might have been true like at one point, but there's not gonna be any sort of like perfect taxonomy that you could like list out, because one of the things like with critical race theory that they're already switching the words to like stuff like social emotional learning and stuff like that, and they're blending it with other stuff. So like not all social emotional learning is technically critical race theory, and so then so that's the type of a dialectic that they're going to do, because the reason why every new theory is so different but so the same is the Derridian difference, or the dialectic, or the Aufheben. We got rid of the thing, but we kept the essence of the thing. That's what Aufheben is. And so then you say, but it's the same thing. No, you don't understand.
It's like what they did to the word masculinity, like what feminism did to masculinity. Like masculinity used to mean masculinity, and it used to be basically a positive thing, not necessarily a value judgment, but it meant something. And then it became toxic masculinity, and now you notice that they just leave the toxic part off because for them toxic masculinity it's redundant. It's totally redundant, and you've seen them do this thing where they're now when they talk about masculinity, they're actually talking about this toxic masculinity idea, and they don't mean any of the stuff that you normally associate with it.
So Jonathan Streeter put up a great, I should have pulled it up, but he did a great post on Mormon stories that actually got some traction. And he posted a Native Liberties video on white supremacy.
That
And
guy's great.
yeah, he's so good. His video on white supremacy is really, really good. Everyone should watch it. If you're on Mormon, if you have access to Mormon Stories board, you should go look at that and see Jonathan's post about it, because his post was really good too. And watch the whole video on white supremacy, because that whole entire thing is talking a bit about the Mott and Bailey game with white supremacy.
And so, but yeah, that mechanism is true. I'm not sure what the next step is, because
I should say it's an Aufheben game with white supremacy, because they kept the word, but they changed the essence. But they kept the essence, but they changed the word. And you know what I mean, man?
Yeah.
We did the magic.
words will evolve, and we have to keep an eye on that to make sure that that might be my next blog post.
Well, so when you're discussing, and your book is focused on academia, but you can definitely retrofit it to many other institutions. This is an institutional disease. It operates and feeds on. One of my friends who teaches at the Evergreen State College says that basically anybody with a boss will eventually become woke. There's something about the power
anybody with
source.
what? Sorry.
Anybody with a boss will
with a
eventually
boss.
become woke.
Oh, okay.
He's really, really cynical because he works at
Yeah.
Evergreen freaking College, and he's like
Yeah.
the last man standing, more or less. But in your book, you say, okay, they'll
Kevin and I are going to talk about that a bit more, but we actually think some of that process has happened in the Mormon Church. But a lot of how the stuff gets into corporate is just liability worry. And the way they can kind of push on stuff is to make it a liability worry. And the way the church gets pushed on, why I say that money and that stuff is going to become a bigger issue for them, or even organizations like the Scouts, is because of the liability worry. And then you can get very manipulated by this sort of stuff. For
start to take over these different disciplines or these different departments by advocating for critical retro studies or critical. James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose and Peter Boghossian called out studies as a woke advance. You call out critical something, critical this, critical that, and then you also do something very
the word theory.
Yeah.
The word theory is
I forgot about that one. Studies. Yeah. Studies doesn't mean studies. It doesn't mean they studied jack shit if somebody got a degree in something studies.
But the theory, I mean, they're not theories, they're movements.
I mean, we even know, I mean, it was famous because somebody published it. Like, Anita Sarkeesian's master's thesis was that she watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I mean, okay. I mean, I've studied South Park. Okay. Yeah. I wouldn't imagine calling myself South Park's. Well, I'm an expert in South Park studies.
Yeah, there's
especially if it meant that I was, it was anything but like I have an interest in South Park and I'm prepared to talk about it a lot. Because I am that stuff. But like, yeah, the idea that like there's actually a secret political angle that I'm grinding at. I mean, that's one of those things where I think about like times in the past where like I ran into, this woke ideas, these critical ideas before I knew what they were. Like one of them was about 2004. Where or no, not 2004, it had to have been after that. It was like, but yeah, mid 2000s, but after Katrina. And I was, with a group of people just having just a gathering, and the girl was talking about, so awful what happened. That was such a racist thing. And I just asked like, basic like, how did how did Noah fit the dinosaurs on the ark? Questions like, wait, how is Katrina caused by racism? And that just immediately led to her crying and everybody treating me like I was an asshole. And then it was years later looking back, where I was like, oh no, she believed these critical theory things, and having somebody come along and ask for things like evidence was just proof that I'm a secret white supremacist trying to uphold white supremacy, blah blah blah. And I was just like, well, no, come on, like that.
Well, the whole TV series Treme was based off of trying to make that point, I'd say. But that's David Simon. But David Simon's all about the systems, man.
Systems of systems.
very clever, which is really important that people need to know about, is that within the STEM or the hard science places, they can't really do critical engineering or critical physics yet, but they do physics and society, engineering and society. So they are, you can always, it's like it.
They figure out a way. They figure out a way in.
It's like they can't help but declare the genus of these new kind of studies or these adaptations that they're putting in them, like some sort of tree frog or tropical bird. They can't help but dress it up with feathers, even by pluralizing words that don't need to be pluralized. I hear that a lot. Societies or community, well, not communities so much, but rhetorics, or something like histories. And
history. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, it sounds like what you're saying is it'd be wiser for them just to kind of make the invasion and not announce it. And so if they were more clever, that's what they would do. I think that's a little bit what you're arguing.
I think that there's something about it where they can't resist doing that. I think that they're in love. They're in love. Basically, it's rhetoric.
This is their Achilles heel, is that they want credit for it. You know what I mean? It's a little bit like that Time magazine article that came out about fortifying the election and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
like, you guys
are proud of it.
Yeah, they want the credit for it, and they want to get in. They want to be noticed, and they could do better if they really, really were full-on entryists. Like a true entryist would have been maybe like some Marxist infiltrator that you imagine back in like the KGB Leninist times or something like that. But they're too arrogant and too in love with their own abilities to toy with language. And some of the entryists I've seen around the ex-Mormon scene, I think, are pretty in love with that too. And some of their language, what he's talking about here is the language gives it away to me, to somebody who knows or hears it. And for a while, I think they got away with a long time. They got away with even kind of regurgitating some Foucauldian idea as if it were their own or something like that. And I'd be sitting there listening, just kind of going like, is everybody else hearing this? You hear what they're saying? And somebody else like John DeLynn just goes, "Oh, it's brilliant! Oh, it's brilliant! It's brilliant."
And it's a narcissistic rhetoric, so it really adores itself.
Yes.
Because it's righteous, the cause is righteous, and also it just has to dress up in a vestment. I don't know why. I think that it's not about being clever. I think it's about some sort of pride or narcissism or something where they can't resist language. They really love language because language creates reality. Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah. That's definitely. I mean, it's funny because people like us, we often criticize that notion that language creates reality. But I think one thing that we've learned is that it does to a certain, like they've been very effective at using language to create reality. Mm-hmm. And so
the reason Marxism and Hegelianism and all this stuff has stayed around is because there is an effectiveness to it. And I don't think it's like effective in reality, like pragmatic ways to organize society and that sort of stuff, but it's successful in becoming a sort of a religious fervor, just like we were talking about. I'm not saying it's Marxist, but like the Thrive movement, it's going to be successful in the same ways that it kind of creates these South Parkian mobs.
I brought it up before, that research about how people's estimates of the police shooting situation, actual statistics, and that even conservatives tend to seriously overestimate the scale of the problem. And they don't go so far as to say that there's a systemic race problem, but like they have managed to create the reality in the heads of the left in general that it's you hear all the terms, it's open season, all this stuff, and we don't need to go over it all. We'll get algorithmed out, but this idea that police are just willy-nilly murdering young African American kids with no consequences, and that this is the most pressing issue facing young African American men as a demographic today. You know, like, yeah, and it's crazy. They have managed to create that. They've said systemic racism enough times. They did the Goebbels thing. You just say it enough times until it's true.
Yep.
And now it's true. Oh, systemic racism is just taken as an article of faith.
But beyond
They treat it as that.
Along with the Goebbels thing or the Hitler thing or what always comes up in all that is why, again, maybe you should have studied South Park, because I think I've said for years, South Park is, if anybody really wants to understand our times, at least up till now, we'll see if they keep going with it. In the past 20 years, South Park is worth watching. But one of the things that if you stop and think about South Park, where the nuttiness really comes from, and the nuttiness really ultimately always is in South Park with the crowd. The crowd is the thing that can just go nutty and be nutty and push nuttiness and given time.
A technique we have to be conscious of, and it's the preamble to one of the sections is this thing like take it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I was over the course of my career and my studies, I often came across these things, and I was confidently dismissive of them, thinking, oh yeah, well, that's just kooky talk and it's not going to go anywhere, and I'll just do something else and concentrate on the important things.
I'm guilty of it. And by the time I got to a point where like, this is a big problem, other people were like, what are you talking about? It's a little problem. And it's just because I'd seen stuff when it was at a bit smaller of a mustard seed. But the reason I left college and walked away and said, I'll go get into the business world is because I said, oh, you guys can have this. It'll stay here in the ivory tower.
Yeah.
And then I turned around and all of a sudden it had kind of taken over my world. So I think, there may be a narcissistic aspect to it, but I think there's also the choice of words and the inclusion of words is important from this weaponization perspective, because you can't you can't really invade a discipline. You can't just go in there into engineering or into computer science, and then all of a sudden, once you're in, you can't just say, okay, no, things are different now. We have to be paying attention to equity in computer science or in engineering. And so, I mean, what I see happening a lot is that these words are put in place, and this is the classic example of the terribly complicatedly named tactic, the reverse Mott and Bailey Trojan horse, but where you have...
It's like he created a Kama Sutra of social justice rhetoric.
I like that. Yeah, or maybe more like a haiku. It's the social justice haiku. But yeah, anyhow, so you go in and you're an adherent to the critical social justice perspective. You think it would be great if it were in engineering, because engineering is too rules based or too liberal or too inherently racist or whatever it is. And so you want to get in there, you want to be able to start influencing things. And so you propose to someone, oh, well, it's really important in engineering, something that we don't take into consideration enough is the relationship between engineering and society. And so, and then the person who you're talking to, the dean of your school or whatever, is like, oh yeah, nothing wrong with that. I can't see why that would be a problem. And that's when, like, later on, after you've hired 2 or 3 more professors into this new domain, you recognize all of a sudden what society was meant to mean. And it's really society, in this case, it becomes weaponized, and society is having a critical perspective on engineering.
So society not as it is, but society as it should be and is, and then changing society and using or submitting all of engineering's capacities and powers to re-engineering society in order to affect the social justice equity agenda.
Yeah, exactly. So there's all these things that are packed into that one word, but if the word hadn't been used in the first place, it wouldn't be able to get weaponized later. And that's why I think it's not just a narcissistic thing. Although I think there is, to a certain extent, there is a kind of
it's a tactical
narcissistic,
thing,
but there's also glee of being able to force people to use a word they didn't use before.
Yeah, I mean, it is. you don't break this up. I don't think you bring this up in the book, but just the coercive speech, or the forcing of people to speak these words, especially with the pronouns, is one site of intervention, because now it's not just about declaring your pronouns, it's about declaring that you will do what is expected of you in this new world order, which is now rearranging the world according to language, and the signifier of she and him, or her and him, or whatever, no longer point to what they used to point to. They now point to something that's completely divorced from what it was. And the entire inversion, that if you don't think through what those neo-pronouns are, or just elective gender signifiers, if you don't think through the implications of that, what you're doing is not just swallowing the ideology whole, but you're also you're also a part of it now. It's also
and
becomes
you're perpetuating
it. And you're perpetuating it. So
yeah. I guess it's just the Watch Ben show, but like, I mean, that's one of those things where it's like, you know, anybody who spends any time thinking about it, where they say like, oh, gender is a social construct, it's all socially constructed. Okay, then what are transgender people transitioning from or to? You know, oh, no. You can't say it like that because it's, you know, I don't know. It's all madness.
I'm gonna pull this one other video, which I think is kind of funny because we were talking earlier about over time how you change, how you perceive stuff, and we brought him up last time. But Doug Wilson, he was a guy who hardcore Christian dude. He did a whole tour with Christopher Hitchens, and I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that.
Yeah.
And they went and had all these debates. And at that time, of course, I was a super Christopher Hitchens guy. And I think in those sorts of like debates about the empiricism, I mean, I think Hitchens would kind of mop the floor with him. So I didn't even like the videos of that stuff. I don't know. Hitchens was just able to, like, at that time frame, kind of pummel him. But all this time later, here's one of the things that comes out is that I like listening to Doug Wilson now. I listen to him all the time because he has a whole bunch of good takes. Sometimes he goes like a little bit too far into like his religion, but that's his religion, you know. But let me pull this video here. We watched it the other time, but just a little bit of it.
Oh yeah.
I've been asked quite a few times how long I think that our current cultural woke spasm can continue. The answer lies somewhere in between, longer than you might think, and not indefinitely. It cannot go on and on and on because Stein's law informs us that anything that cannot continue on indefinitely won't. Whatever else it is, stupidity is not a sustainable strategy. The left's great naming mistake. But one of the reasons why I think we are nearing the break point is that I believe that the commies have made the fatal mistake of allowing themselves to be identified and named. That naming has now happened. It is in common currency, and that means the battle lines are drawn.
That's a little bit, like I said, I think I said it last time I listened to it, but it wasn't so much a mistake. Like, they didn't mean for it to happen. They didn't want for it to happen, but it was going to happen sooner as they got to a breaking point. But like they said in the Boyce video, kind of idea is like by the time you notice, it's too late anyway. But there's part of me that thought one of the things that was redeemable about the Trump phenomenon is that this stuff was more like true entryism at first. Like, it was creeping and sneaking in, and the Trump phenomenon made them show their hands maybe earlier than they should have shown their hands.
Yeah.
Because it was the long march to the institutions, as Rudy Deutsche put it, was happening, and it was going to plan. And you could call Trump a little bit of a reaction to it, but still most of like the normal regular people weren't fully aware of it. But something about the Trump phenomenon.
Well, I think part of it is that, I mean, that was their wishful thinking. but they wanted Trump to be a fascist, obviously, because then that would, because like once there's an actual fascist, then it justifies literally everything they do is justified, which is kind of where they're at. Doesn't matter that Trump wasn't a fascist.
I'll tell you what, right now, if all this Marxism just vanished and went away, as people said would happen if we just got Biden in, and it didn't.
That was a big fat lie.
But if it just did, and then everybody could call me a crazy who overreacted, I'll be fine with that. I'll take that.
Yeah.
Go away, Marxism.
Yeah.
I don't believe it will be too long before battle is joined. So by commies, I mean anyone appealing in any progressive way to the tenets of BLM, woke, critical race theory, critical theory, political correctness, the Frankfurt School, social justice, cultural Marxism, intersectionality, feminism.
And none of this exists, but you want to know how you can make it exist? Believe in it. It's like Santa Claus, it's like none of the Frankfurt School or none of a cultural Marxism. It's not true unless you're somebody who agrees and believes in it, then it's true.
Yeah, totally.
But if you disagree with it, it's a conspiracy theory. It's Schrodinger's movement. It's Schrodinger's Marxism.
And other assorted collectivist ends and commie odds. Some of these commies are commie simpliciter, meaning the ones running the show, and some of these commies are commie dupes, meaning the foot soldier chumps, and frequently recruited from the ranks of soft evangelicalism. Why does this naming matter? Back in the old days, when some lunatic economic proposal was presented to a bewildered public by some liberal official, the person making the proposal observed all the decencies, and the people surrounding him would observe most of the decencies. And that is what normals would look at and be reassured. So in political debate, just a few years ago, whenever a conservative referred to Gramsci or to critical theory or to cultural Marxism, the leftist in the debate could just backhand him and tell him to educate himself or to do his homework or to read a book, bozo. And just a few years ago, that tactic would frequently work. The conservative was attempting to name what was going on around him, but the times were such that the name wouldn't stick. But we are now at the point where the name is stuck, and this means that there's a large population of disgruntled normals who have a name for what they are up against. The war has not yet happened, but the uniforms have been handed out. And
yeah, I think the war will happen. It'll get dicey and tricky, but they'll keep trying to like dodge and hide out of it. But I think the whole entire world of what I imagine doing, and especially in like the ex-Mormon world, is just expose the thing, but it's also been exposing itself, you know. And I honestly could like take it or leave, get into the level of talking about if it's good or not good. I mean, there's just this whole other level of just naming the thing and pointing it out and letting people know what sort of a manipulative, underhanded workings people are trying to do on them.
It's just always the question is like, do people find out too late? Like, we're seeing this play out right now with defund the police, because one thing they say, defund the police. Well, what do you mean? Well, we don't mean defund the police. Well, what do you mean? Oh, we mean that we believe that the very concept of police is oppressive and we want to get rid of police entirely. But we don't mean, we just want to defund the police. And then some of them they'll cop to being police abolitionists.
So we'll reimagine
play out where
we'll out-haven the police.
Yeah, but that's we're seeing all over America where these places where local councils did defund police, and now everywhere that's happened, people are begging for more police again. So there goes that.
But then they put
anything.
Then a form of entryism happens where they put in certain words that will make it so you have to mouth or show allegiance to certain words when you go through the hiring process. So then they only go hiring certain people with certain.
The police departments are back, but now they have an equity and diversity director or whatever.
Yeah, and some form of what they talk about, that whole entire entryism is a bit of the repressive tolerance. It's like get out anybody who doesn't agree with our party line and get in anybody who does agree with our party line. And it's a bit how the universities were completely taken over, you know, because it's entryism, you know, and words, magic words, playing with words. The words are magic. But
Totally. All right, we're about 2 hours. Have you got more?
no. I mean, I got a lot. I mean, this didn't even
I
hit
know
on
you
the
always got
things.
things.
This didn't even hit on the things that we like. The real thing that we should be hitting on is the dumb Larson Marx. I think it's kind of funny. Saint Marx. He turned his reading of Saint Marx into Marxism or Saint Marxism.
Saint Marxism.
And that's one thing I want to do. And then this covered a little bit.
I also made the joke that it's Marxism, Leninism, Larsonism.
He's not political though.
Oh, yeah. See, we have to do an episode because they both. I mean, I think I have to watch it again. I know Dylan did. They both reiterated they're like, if we're wrong, tell us how.
Yeah, but
like,
at the very end,
I'm sure that Chris Hanna is blocked on your shit right now.
Well, at the very end, he made a reference, which I think might have been a sub mention of us. It might not have been, but he said, "I want to get into the concept of you just demanding your First Amendment rights doesn't give you a chance to come in and bully and bully in your discriminative ideas or something like that." I think he is sub mentioning us, although we didn't mention First Amendment rights or anything like that. We're just talking about you're not really open to criticism.
Well,
but
no,
we don't think they deserve to put us on their dumb show or any sort of thing like that. But the reason I know that is because so many times over the years, as I've gotten into arguments with these people, they'll bring up their repressive tolerance ideas, and then they'll say, "What, are you going to cry now because of First Amendment?" Like they'll bring it up first. Like,
oh yeah,
I'm not the one who mentioned First Amendment, but they're like, "You think First Amendment gives you the right to talk on my show?" No.
Well, I mean, they have a Republican boogie straw man that inhabits their imagination, and that's who we are to them, is that thing, you know. As far as they're concerned, we're like,
I don't know. Larson might be at a high enough meta level that he just knows that we're just there to poop on his parade of rage, you know, because Streeter commented and had him reel off his stuff on that. And it's kind of funny because he'd start reeling off and then he'd like quickly just double down right back into it. But you just can kind of tell that like any sort of curbing off idea that he gets is just a pee on his parade. He doesn't like it.
Maybe I got to put myself through watching that whole thing again. Well, not the whole thing. That's one thing that bugged me, is there was the pre-show part, and then it took him 45 minutes to get into the meeting.
You didn't get to the part where Streeter got him to
I did, but I mean, because the whole podcast was 3 hours long. I don't know, but yeah, we got to re-listen to the Gospel of Marxism part and do a whole episode on that part.
That's one of the areas where I talk about beyond all like the words and the goofiness. Because I mean, I think if you got John Larson to really talk, he'd probably just to admit to his vulgar Marxism. But
sure, so I don't know how he couldn't otherwise. Because like I don't entirely disagree with his analysis of Marx. Like a lot of it was good, and also like his whole main preamble about how, you know, most people think that the Gospels tell a story that they don't. Like all of that stuff is really excellent, you know, but.
Well, I think that
this is reading that Marx is all about.
To me, I sit there read, and I actually
participate in the economic system.
I only listen to the latter half of that, but to me, that's kind of one of these signs that you should listen to if you're people. If they spend their whole entire time doing this kind of liberation theology, where it is we're going to turn all of this religion, what it should be doing is leftist politics.
Yeah.
Is what this religion should be doing if it were true and correct and right is some sort of materialist, just focus on money, focus on are we taking care of the poor. That's a Marxist reading. That's what the liberation theologists did, is turn it all into politics, and the politics that have to do with money and redistribution of money. And to me, at some point, like that just gets old, or beyond old, something that's just easy to do. The Helen Pluckrose video that describes wokeism, what gets the end of it, as I pointed out, like Lindsay Hansen would always kind of like say some stuff wasn't cool because it wasn't new or something like that. And I'm like, this stuff is as old as time. You know, I was sitting there reading Lukács's descriptions of the stuff, and it's 100 years freaking old of him sitting there playing around with trying to make sense of making materialist money the focus of all centers of life. And I was just sitting there like reading it and like thinking like how much these guys at that time frame had to just sit there and only think about that stuff all day, every day, to sit there and write that stuff. And then when I go listen to John Larson describe Bible stuff and what should be happening or should be thought of if it were true goodness of the Bible stuff, and it's just that same materialism, spread the wealth, oppressive class, oppressor class, you know, to me it's just such obviously like a Marxist reading that it bores me to tears. Like,
Yeah.
I heard 20-something-year-old kids do that in college.
I thought it was funny that
Shakespeare,
they
22 years old. And
I thought it was funny that they reference Monty Python's Life of Brian,
because that also rips on
that movie rips on Marxism 100% as much as it rips on Christianity.
It rips on I think it's in that one that they get that transgender part into it.
Yeah,
too.
Loretta.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, like every time I watch that movie, I'm shocked at how topical it is.
Yeah.
And also, I still think it is the like most jokes per minute comedy in the history of comedies.
The
so
best,
funny.
in my opinion, the best movie of like the past 10 years actually had a bunch of those guys in it doing their thing, how they do it, and that's The Death of Stalin.
I need to
And
watch that.
they're so freaking good at it. But if you ever like want to watch like a situation where people don't know what to do with their words or what to say or who might cancel who, it's such a good movie. Like every single line in it has like this double layer of what's he going to think of me? What's he going to think of me? Is he going to think bad of me? Who's going to think bad of me? I can't say what I think because everybody might think that I'm bad. And it's so good. But those guys too, they're almost pulling out Life of Brian level commentary on it, you know.
Hooray for George Harrison. George Harrison
kept him alive.
Yeah, George Harrison sold property to create a production company to make The Life of Brian. I think John Cleese, one of the guys, joked that it was the most expensive movie ticket in history. Do you know this story?
Yeah, I've heard.
They couldn't sell. Obviously, like no studio would touch it. And one of them, I think Eric Idle or somebody, like they were friends and they were in LA, and they like left a copy of the script with George Harrison. And George Harrison loved the script so much that he like sold a bunch of property, put together handmade films, which ended up going bankrupt. He lost money on it. But yeah, he put up $1 million to make.
Bankrolled that director from Brazil too. Was he part of it too?
Terry Gilliam. Well, Terry Gilliam was one of the Monty Python guys.
Yeah.
But the most expensive movie ticket in history, George Harrison.
They're so good. Every single aspect of it is good and great. And John Cleese's Twitter to this day is still good.
He's in the news today. He's gonna like make a formal complaint against the BBC because they did an ambush interview on him. Not an ambush interview, but I don't know. You should read that. I'll send you the link. But yeah, like you said, apparently I want to see the clip. I don't know. I'm not even sure if the interview has been released. I don't know. But yeah, at one point he said, like, I thought this is not the interview I agreed to. But yeah, because I guess, he was trying to talk about his comedy stuff, and the interviewer brought up all the recent controversies, which is just ABC type thing to do to an old comedian like John Cleese. I think that the BBC went back on memory holding that episode of Faulty Towers.
Really?
I think so. Like the way I read in the article today, it made it sound like
that warms my heart.
Episode is available again.
Old lefties push back on stuff. I mean, I've even seen some like the leftists from like, Pink Floyd will push back on it and all that sort of stuff. Like that's one of the good things about that white supremacy video by Native Literary. He talks at the end of like, honestly, like you could go against the stuff. You can keep all your progressive bona fides. You really could.
It's so crazy to think that John Cleese has a conservative voice today. That's how far the Overton window has moved.
There's some sort of
John Cleese, yeah. John Cleese is the conservative voice.
J.K. Rowling, she's a TERF that must be.
Yeah, J.K. Rowling is a TERF.
But there's some sort of level too. Is like I I think maybe people say democratic socialism is or whatever, but there's some sort of level of that people are still kind of pushing as that of pre-Marxism. But there's like a level of me of like, maybe could you Marxist like socialist guys bring about get back to like arguing for the economics of this thing and take out that whole religious dialectic stuff? Like
Well, they can't.
yeah.
What would that leave them with? They'd have to come up with a theory.
Well, I'm just saying, how about just a redistribution theory? Just call it redistribution. We're not doing the weird religion.
That would still be a plan. Like, I mean, I think that's that thing that James Lindsay in that wonderful podcast, Communism Doesn't Know How, which is really like, it's built into the thing that, I mean, any plan, like if you're even talking about a plan, you're just playing into the current, hegemonic system of systems, like the only thing you can do is tear down. It's the only progressive thing is to tear down systems until all the systems are out of the way, and then paradise will manifest itself. That's what they believe. But and that's not even the craziest thing that anybody's ever believed. As crazy it is, it's just the most destructive thing that anybody's believed.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't think
that's not weirder than Jainism. Like, is it? I don't know. But Jainism, is the most harmless. It's a religion about being harmless. Like the highest value that anybody can attain to in Jainism is don't hurt nothing ever. Which is so. Despite it can be the weirdest thing in the world, but as long as they believe that, it's the most harmless religion ever. But because in the sense of because Jainism believes all kinds of weird stuff about the cosmos and reincarnation. That's a little bit weirder than looking at capitalism and saying some people that get a really shitty deal out of it. Well, that's not totally crazy. But the actual practice of doing Marxist thought, that's pretty nuts. Still not as crazy as Jainism. Just way deadly. Totally destructive.
To me, the whole word games that we're getting at here is just like I said some of the other days, that some of the postmodernist concepts of epistemology and the way that they finagle stuff to make their stuff work, to me, is the worst part of it. There's almost some sort of level that okay, if you want to just talk about redistributing stuff, talk about redistributing stuff. Or if you want to talk about, I think racism still continues and it's systemic, talk about that. But when they get to the whole level of playing with epistemology and words and acting out this whole manipulative grand scheme, to me, there's a level of that makes it almost like if the Jains were going around playing those manipulative games,
they're not. Yeah, they don't lie to
be
you
worse
about
than they are
by
now.
words. Yeah. That's another great episode. I don't know. He talks about it a lot, but I think there was one episode Lindsay did that specifically about, I think he used the word democracy and about how they deliberately play with words and let you believe the colloquial understanding while using their secret Marxist Hegelian understanding.
Yeah, I linked it to the BYU video we had of the BYU guest speaker who just guest spoke his liberation theology at a BYU.
I didn't watch that. I tried to watch that, but
one of the things he talked, because another person, somebody on the religious side, saw it and said, "Oh, I like that he at least talks about democracy." And they said, that word democracy is a Mott and Bailey word, man.
Yeah.
Because real communism is true democracy. True democracy. Communism is the only true democracy. I think that's a quote right from Marx.
Yeah, we don't have democracy. What we're calling democracy is actually just we're all puppets of the systems that systemically systematize everything.
I don't think it's loud enough here, but I have that Coen Brothers Marcuse thing pulled up. I don't, for some reason it doesn't play very loud.
Give it a shot. I'll see what I hear.
I just want to put it because it's such a perfect example. I've shown it to people, and the first time they might have watched it and they don't know what the joke is. And then after you kind of realize that there's all this subtle hinting with words, it becomes such a funny scene. But so the first time I watched it, being highly aware of it, I was just rolling on the floor laughing, and some random person might not have. But I think there's some sort of level that the Coen brothers are playing with people too. I honestly think the Coen brothers cast George Clooney as a useful idiot because George Clooney's a useful idiot. I really think that. I really do think it.
Is it working? There it is.
I just don't think it's very loud.
I can hear it. Maybe not. Is it playing?
It's playing. I got a little.
Yeah, I can't hear nothing.
I don't know why it's so quiet. How about now?
Yes, I can hear it.
Those things are a nuisance.
Thank you.
We'll have sandwiches in a minute. Tea.
So he's an actor who's been kidnapped by this group, and he doesn't even know what he's walking in on here.
Tea. Okay. Yeah. And going on.
Yeah. Well, we've just read the minutes, and Alan was about to bring up new business.
I missed a minute. I wouldn't worry about it.
They're usually pretty boring.
What kind of a meeting is this? Well, it's not a meeting so much as a.
It's more of a study group.
Studies.
All sorts of jolly stuff.
History, economics.
History, economics.
Same thing, isn't it? History, economics.
Don't you agree?
It's so brilliant. The editing is just perfect.
Yeah.
Quiet, Ingalls.
So,
The dog's named Ingalls. Quiet Ingalls.
Man is split. Well, man's functions are split. There's the little guy, the regular Joe who works for a living. He's the body politic. Then there's the brain, the boss, the owner.
the boss is not the brain.
No, the boss is parasite. Well, it's true that the boss doesn't work, but he has a function. He controls the means of
Production, sure, but that's not a function. That's
parasitism. Shut up!
It's so funny because just yesterday, all that stuff went down with Elon Musk and Elizabeth Warren, and this is what so many different people. I saw Joy Reid say that Elon Musk is parasitizing off of the system.
Yeah.
Regular Joe. It's
This is Marcuse.
Man is unitary, a simple economic agent. Man's institutions are split, expressing contradictions that must be worked through.
Contradictions that must be worked through.
And they are worked through in a causative, predictable way. History is science. This is the essence of the dialectic.
History is science. And they all,
You see, if you understand economics, you can actually write down what will happen in the future with as much confidence as you write down the history of the past, because it's science.
The only thing, like, they couldn't do it obviously because this is a serious movie. But I just wish here the Coen brothers had done what the South Park guys did with the Scientology, where there's big captured underneath that said, "This is what Marxists actually believe."
perfect. Yeah. And you want to know what?
It's like none of this is a caricature. Like,
No,
this is
and beyond it too is you might think like that's kind of general. So maybe I'll like go look into each one of those things to see if I can get it more.
no, those are bullet
Nope.
points.
Nope,
Those are
you
the
keep-
bullet points.
That you go into it and it's just more of that kind of repeated. Well, listen to how Lenin said it, or listen to how Lukács said it, or listen to how Mao said it, and they just kind of say the same thing, maybe worded a little like the same way that like Marcuse stopped and said it, and then this guy stopped and said it, and the other guy stopped and said it, and you didn't learn a single thing better, you know.
It's not make-believe.
We don't believe
Yeah, and look at the useful idiot actor.
in Santa Claus.
Another finger sandwich.
Thank you.
Now, if I follow this correctly, who's that guy?
Mr. Smitrovich takes pictures for our newsletter.
Our understanding of the true workings of history give us access to the layers of power. Yours.
Our understandings of the true workings of history give us access to the levels of power.
Studio, for instance, is a pure instrument of capitalism. As such, it expresses the contradictions of capitalism and can be enlisted to finance its own destruction.
Which is exciting.
Yeah.
It can be made to help the little guy, the regular Joe.
The body politic. Shut up.
Even though its purpose is to exploit the little guy.
On the body politic.
You're for the little guy.
For the little guy against, it doesn't matter. History will be what it'll be, and we already know what it'll be. But yes, but for the little guy.
History will be what it'll be, and we already know what it'll be. This is historicism. This is what's called historicism. You should read what Karl Popper wrote about historicism. Karl Popper lit historicism up.
And also, this guy basically just summarized Lenin's attitude toward all the people who died while Lenin was still alive.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it doesn't matter. This is how history goes.
Yeah. And it's funny because like Karl Popper, so many years ago, when he started writing out like against this stuff, he got the same sort of arguments in the public sphere that people get nowadays. They say, "Oh, Karl Popper was just a grifter. He was just trying to get into these different colleges or something like that. He's trying to get into the Vienna Circle." Or all the way back, Schopenhauer, who ripped on Hegel. I saw the same arguments. Schopenhauer was just trying to get in to this other school, and that they use the same exact arguments about old philosophers who ripped on these guys that they use on like modern day YouTubers who talk against them.
You shut up.
Are you joking? Me for the little guy? Of course I'm for the little guy. This guy a comedian? Listen, I better get back. The studio's got to be going nuts. Can we cut it off now and pick it up right here at the next study session?
Okay. Well, see, I'm afraid it's not that simple.
And so, Baird Whitlock found himself in the hands of communists.
There's all this stuff
Man, I
later.
need to watch the rest of that movie just because, like, just watching that, I think so much about that, that every frame of painting guy.
Oh, he's so perfect.
And yeah, but I'm just watching how that whole thing, the framing, the blocking, the editing, it's all so perfect, and it makes me miss good filmmaking because, like,
You haven't watched the whole thing yet?
No, I need to.
There's this scene where all these different religious people are talking with the movie studios about how Christ should be depicted. And if you want,
oh my gosh, I need to watch that.
If you want a marvelous scene, because it's all of them arguing to the movie studio who just cares about making money about what should be Christ or not. Okay. Yeah, as I was saying, the scene of the Jews are even there, and the different Christians talking about how Jesus should be depicted is as glorious as this scene is. And then there's all sorts of scenes where George Clooney, now the useful idiot, goes and regurgitates the Marxism because now he's converted. It's so funny.
Well, this not even on any topic that we normally discuss, but just as a film nerd. Like a few weeks ago, I burned my way through the whole Harry Potter film series. I don't know why, just to see them all again. And I remember in the very last one, there's like, I in my own head, I was joking that like they should have called it like Harry Potter and the plot advancing dialogue, because that's all it was. And there's just this one scene where like there are three of them and they're advancing the plot with their bad dialogue. And the camera is doing this swinging 360 loopy thing, and it's just so ridiculous. And I compare that to that scene where like the cameras are all locked down, it's all low angle, like there's just nothing fancy, just good blocking, good script, good editing.
But think about the script, like the way you write that script so everybody says their point, and like and they have different points, and they all obviously have some backstory of like this guy doesn't like that guy and that guy doesn't like this guy, but they're
there's Kurosawa, like the blocking made me think of Kurosawa. Do you remember when we watched High and Low? and I stopped the movie and dorked out about that scene where they're all just in that rich guy's living room, but the way Kurosawa has them all blocked and just the way
Yeah.
they're standing and everything, and you learn, you just like it's that Plinkett thing where it's like you might not have noticed it, but your brain did, and that scene you just showed me, like the way the small movements people do, the people that are in focus, the people that are out of focus, it's all incredible filmmaking. And then he's like, yeah, it's like you compare that to some Marvel turd movie where the camera's moving constantly and for no purpose. Anyway, and we
Yeah.
got that one. Put that in the can.
That one, and yeah, that show, and between that show and Death of Stalin, I mean, I get so mad that like most TV and movies suck so much butt nowadays. But then like two little movies, I'll be like, well, that just saved my whole entire year of.
Yeah, I need to see a good movie, a new good movie.
Watch those two. I think that one's on because Hail Caesar flew under the radar, and I think it flew under the radar because people didn't get the joke they're making. Because so much of what the joke they're making is exactly this. You know, they're
The Coen brothers have always been smarter than everybody.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that as like a dig. I just mean
Yeah.
they're clearly smarter than everybody.
Yeah.
All righty.
Sweet.
Cool.
Nice.
I'm gonna go finally have dinner for the day.
Fun. All right.
When's the next cast opportunity for you?
Whenever, and the next one I think probably just try to stick to that one St. Marxy clip and not try to bring in all these other things.
If we plan ahead and make sure that I can listen to it and I can like maybe take some notes about timestamps.
Well, just do it now and let's have it be the next one as soon as you feel you got enough timestamps to roll.
Cool. Well, I mean, realistically,